Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming outside me today. Today, we're talking with Drew Emery from the great state of Washington there on the West Coast, our first West Coaster here on the Average Jack Archery Podcast. And if you would like to be a part of the Average Jack Archery Podcast, please do follow the links in the description of this podcast by sending me an email at averagejackarchery@gmail.com, hitting me up on social media with Instagram as well as Facebook. You can also, of course, always leave a comment on YouTube. We'll get you on the podcast as part of the average guy doing the average thing. And I hope that you can join us at some point as we go through. But today, we are talking with Drew Emery, a guy who is newer to the sport of archery hunting, at least from Washington State. And Drew, how are you doing today, bud?
I am doing fantastic this morning. Thanks for having me, man.
I appreciate you coming on. We're 3 hours apart in terms of time zone, but we made it work anyway. So it's good to have you on board. So as always, when we were connecting with people on the podcast, we have a little questionnaire that we bounce back and forth with ideas. And Drew has some great questions and some great topics I think we can cover today from the perspective of me, as I say in air quotes, a average professional. And of course, with Drew being a first timer here in the sport of archery and archery hunting, we have a lot of ideas and questions we can bounce back forth. I think it's going to be a great podcast today. But first, Drew, real quick, tell us about your situation there in the state of Washington, the types of animals that you're hunting, the hunts that we talked about prior to recording, the hunts you're going to be taking this year, your bow setup and all sorts of stuff. Take it away for a few minutes and kind of give folks at home the full scope of it.
All right, so that sounds good. So yeah, like we talked about. So I'm shooting. This is my first year really getting into archery. I got my very first bow last summer. So I'm in that first year. I picked up a Bear G2 Cruiser. It's I set it 60-pound draw weight, and I have it at max draw 30 inches, and my draw length is 30 and a half. So I kind of fudged the D loop to get me there. But it's okay. It's 32-inch axle to axle. And as I'm realizing, like we talked earlier, it might be a little bit short for me, but I'm going to make it work for this season. I'm going to try and do as many of the first time things as I can this year. So I'm going on my very first bow hunt this year. I'm going for elk and deer and maybe bear. We'll see. A bear, I could go with rifle, but we'll see. I don't know how close I want to get to a bear with a bow at my first year. It might be a little too much, but we have, on the west side of the state, we've got primary blacktail, we've got elk, and obviously bear. If I get a chance, I can go to the east side of the state and start hunting whitetail and mule deer. I can't hunt elk over there because I picked the west side, but that's okay. I've got it set up right now for a 4-day backpack in hunt on the west side for elk, deer, and bear. There's supposed to be all three of those critters on this little island out in the Willapa Bay area. So I'm really excited about that. I'm a little nervous, a little excited. It's all kind of wrapped into one. So I've got my bow back. I just had it restrung. So now I'm starting from scratch. I'd spent all of last year working with it. And then I had to get it restrung because I did that novice thing and I tinkered with it and I shouldn't have. So get it restrung. Now I got it back yesterday. Now I'm starting all from scratch. I got a new rest put on it. I got the proper arrow spline. I got 330 arrow splines. I got some Bloodline from Easton, which I've shot a few times now already, and I'm very pleased with those arrows. They're like hitting like a hammer out of it at the 60-pound weight. I picked up, we can use mechanical broadheads or fixed broadheads out here. I'm going with the fixed broadhead. I'm going with the Slick Trick 4-blade fixed broadhead and 100 grain. Mostly because it was highly recommended to me by my archery shop. And being it's my first year and I'm probably overthinking it, I'm hoping that there's going to be less problems with a fixed blade than the potential problems with a mechanical. That may be crap, that may not be any good. I don't know. In my head, that's how I talk to myself. So that's what I'm going with, is fixed broadhead.
No, you're not overthinking it. That's just true.
Yeah,
I
like it. I think it's cool. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, like, moving parts mean things that moving things experience more issues than static things.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of how it works.
Right. Yeah. And that was kind of a thought I had and a fear I had from going from the whisker biscuit that I had on the bow originally and going to a fall away arrow rest. But the deciding factor for me was I got these brand new arrows, these bloodline arrows, and set them up, had brand new whisker and the whisker biscuit. And I took the first 6 arrows and I shot them, honestly less than 20 times a piece. And they already have the ripple effect, the ribboning on the fletching already. And I was like, you know what? No, I'm not going to ruin and have to refletch these arrows brand new. I just don't want to deal with that. I was like, no, I'm going to go to a fall away rest. So that's not a problem anymore. And I went to my archery shop and he said, okay, this is the one I recommend as far as, cost effectiveness, what you're trying to do with it, first time or anything. He's like, it's very reliable. It's gotten good reviews. It's a ripcord code red.
Yep.
He goes, really the only thing you got to worry about, he's like, and it's easy, is every year before hunting season, come in and replace the drawstring on it that attaches to your cable. And then you don't have to worry about it. I mean, he's like, there's always the risk of, being a goofball and nicking it with a broadhead in the panic of, loading an arrow or catching it on a tree branch. But realistically, you could catch a string just as easily. So he said, don't wig out about that. This is all, ball bearing, machined metal stuff. It's not going to have a failure. So I said, okay. So I pulled the trigger and I put a new rest on this year. And so far I shot it, 4 times so far, just kind of sighting in the Peep sight. And, very impressed with it so far. Very happy with it. So I'm excited to get behind the bowstring again and start slinging some serious arrows.
Yeah, and the setup you have, a lot of people message me and talk about shooting that more budget compound setup, and one of them being the Bear Cruiser, the G2, which you're shooting. And I have no problems with the bow. It's a great little bow. But one thing that we talked about off air real quick, that's something that you didn't know, kind of being a new archer, in terms of your peep height and your peep placement as it relates to the axle to axle length of the bow. So real quick, from somebody like me who has shot everything from a 28.5-inch axle out to a 39-inch axle to axle, I know that I like bows that are in like 33 and a half and to about 38. That's like a good window for me, because when I'm at full draw at 31 inches, the string angle isn't super acute, right, where the arrow knocks onto it. But you're discovering that is an issue with you with your bow.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went, and what triggered it for me was actually changing my release. When I went from a index style release to a handheld release, thumb button, because now it changes my anchor point and the way it feels. I had to adjust the peep, and all of a sudden it was like I was having real difficulty lining up my peep and my sight. And so when I got the new string done, I was able to have him help me move my peep around, and my peep had to come up, let's say from its original position when I got the bow. I had to move it up what seems like almost 2 inches up the string just to get it. And then I had to still go with, and this is where I don't know the actual spec of it. I don't know what size peep is in there. I just know it's the biggest he had. Like, we had to put the biggest peep he had so that I could even see the outside ring of my sight. And then even then I had to take,
inch.
Oh yeah, it's ginormous. I was like, can you give me a bigger one? He's like, I don't have it. I was like, okay, well, we'll make it work. So and then on top of that, I still took my sight, which is just a Trophy Ridge fixed 5-pin, I think, 5-pin sight, and I moved it out because it's got 2 sets of holes for mounting. I moved it a bolt hole position out farther, which then got me right where I could just see the outer ring of the sight, and I could see my bubble clearly. So, but yeah, that string angle is very acute, I'm noticing. And I had him take a picture of it when I was at full draw, and it is, it's freakishly close to 45-degree angle when it's at full draw. It is, but again, I didn't know what I didn't know I needed to know when buying a bow or anything, especially because I bought this bow used. I knew enough at least to look over, make sure there's no cracks or bent things or anything that looked extremely out of place. Right. The string appeared to be in good condition. It appeared to be waxed. The guy said he waxed it, so I had to believe him. So I went with it. I still had the bow shop, kind of put some eyes on it, and they didn't see anything that was funky either. So it worked out. But then with me trying to move my peep sight with this whole hand release thing, I nicked the string. So that's shame on me, but it's okay. But yeah, that acute string angle is a piece of information that I feel like isn't necessarily been really covered a great deal in the research I was doing, because like you got your bow shops you can go to and get information if you can have, if there's one close to you, or you got to go to like the big box stores like a Bass Pro Shop or a Cabela's, and they're limited on what they can talk to you about because they got a lot of people coming in and out. Then you go to the YouTube, you watch your show on Average Jack, or you watch Knock on Nation, or any of those other Brandon McDonald on his site, to get information. And there's a lot of similar information you can get, but there's also so much diversity in the information that it's kind of difficult. It's overwhelming. I found it very overwhelming with what I needed to know or should know. So I ended up with like more questions than answers sometimes.
Right. But I will say, I want to go back to two things you brought up real quick before we move on to talk. I want to talk about this handheld release thing and picking a release here in a second. But I want to talk about the string angle, how that was not something that you saw that was discussed, but also go back to moving the sight further away from the riser, the sight housing further away from the riser. So a lot of people actually notice it. And ironically, I just got a message yesterday or 2 days ago, someone asking about if why there's so many holes on the sight bar. And so the reason why they put so many holes in the sight bar is not so it looks cooler further away or in closer or to offset weight or something like that. The reason why they're there is the further away the sight gets from the riser, the smaller it appears to your eye, right? This is just basic, simple physics. The further something away is, the smaller it appears, the closer it is, the bigger it is. And so if you're having an issue with your Peep and you can't put the ring of your sight housing inside the ring of your Peep against your eye, then you're not lining everything up, right? That's what you need for a rifle sight. You need to line everything up by being able to see everything. If you can't see everything with your bow, you're going to have wild up, down misses, left, right misses, depending on what you can't see of your sight housing in your Peep. And so that's good that you caught that you can move that further away, make the sight housing smaller, and fit it into your Peep. That's something that I have always struggled with Peeps. For some reason, at my 30, I started at 30. For some reason, since I started the channel 5 years ago, I'm still growing. I don't know how that's possible. I've gone from a 30 to a 30 and a half, and now I'm 31, and my target bow is actually set up at 31 and a half inches of draw length, and it feels really, really good. But I have almost a 79-inch wingspan. So I've got these real long orangutan arms. And so putting a sight housing further away from my eye, because my draw length is so long, it looks tiny. So I actually have to bring it in pretty close, or I have to shoot a pretty small Peep on the back end to get it to match with that really small sight housing that's far, far away from my eye. And vice versa. If you shoot a 27, 28-inch draw, you're going to have to go with the big Peep and probably push that sight housing further away from the riser so you can fit everything in appropriately. Just something you're going to have to play with, and your pro shop should be able, when you go in and you're trying your sight housing out, the two Peep sizes that are most common for bow hunters are 3/16, and the biggest one is a 1/4 inch. If you start getting down to smaller size Peeps, they let less light in, which is okay for target shooting, but not for hunting.
Right.
So anyhow, so that's cool that you caught that. And the second thing is the string angle, why no one really talks about it. And I don't really talk about it because I'm a freak of nature. And you almost, and in your way, with a 30 and a half inch draw is also kind of a freak of nature, where most people really do live between 27 to 29 and a half. That's where the lion's share of people live. And so if you're down in that 28, 27, you can really get away with a 28, 29-inch axle-to-axle bow and not experience any issues. And so I find it really hard for me to say, oh, yeah, you need to shoot a longer axle-to-axle bow, when in reality, that's true for a smaller percentage of us. And that's why you see not a whole lot of hunting bows nowadays above the 31 and a half to 32-inch axle to axle, because the vast majority of archers are not that big. And also, the bigger the bow gets, the longer and wieldier it is, the more it weighs, so on and so forth. So do you want to just deal with a shorter string angle, or deal with lugging a heavier, longer bow that gets tangled and stuff easier? And manufacturers have weighed those pros and cons, and they're going to keep producing short bows.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I had been told, was a lot of times when you're bow hunting, you want the bow hunter wants the shorter axle because it's smaller, it's more compact, it's not going to be banging on stuff in the brush, it's not going to interfere when you're up in the tree stand. And I said, okay, I mean, that makes, for me as like a novice and inexperienced, okay, it made sense. And then you go to the longer bows, axle for target archery and stuff, because you get that longer string angle, you get a little more power, you get a little more stability. I said, okay, again, it makes sense to a guy who doesn't know the difference. But for me, I will go with a longer axle so that the string angle and the bow overall fits me more comfortably, and just deal with the fact of if I ever start shooting from a tree stand, that I have to make a little bit bigger a swing when I pull my bow out, or I've got to be careful when I'm going through the brush because I got a bigger bow. In fact, I'll make that sacrifice over the sacrifice of a weird string angle and having to do some of the weird stuff with a peep at a different size and my sight way out there. Like I would rather have a bow that is properly fitted and comfortable for me to shoot regardless, and have to adapt my method in the woods when I'm hunting. I mean, I don't out here where I'm hunting so far, I'm not hunting from a tree stand. I'm more of a spot and stock kind of a situation. So yes, I'm going to be walking through the woods carrying it. I'm going to be crawling through the brush and stuff like that. And I'm okay with, like, I've already had the conversation with myself in my head. Okay, you're going to be okay with, dragging this through some brush and being, having to be more careful with it. That's fine, because I know that when I pull up in a draw, now it's a little bit grayer because it's not quite fitted for me, but it's as good as it's going to get. But I want the bow to be fitted for me, and I'll adapt to the conditions in which I'm hunting. So, that's the way I look at it. Right, wrong, or indifferent. That's how I'm with it.
Right, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, all I do is tree stand hunt, and everybody talks about how you want a shorter bow for the tree stands, you don't get hung up on branches. You want a shorter bow for spot and stock, so you can crawl around through the brush or whatever with it. But no one ever talks about how in 2005, the shortest bow you could get was like 35 inches axle to axle. And I'm pretty sure there was a lot of deer killed in 2005.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. And so, and it's also funny, I'll just bring this up, and this is just because Matthews does this. Matthews, for example, makes like the VXR 28 and the VXR 31.5 currently. But the cams on a Matthews, if you don't know, which I think everybody does, but if you look at the cams on they're enormous. And if you look at a Matthews bow, Google Matthews at full draw or something, and Chris B, for example, is probably the biggest guy on YouTube with shooting Matthews, Levi Morgan as well. When that giant cam rolls over, even though the bow is only 28 inches axle to axle, that cam adds another 2 inches at least of string angle either end. So you're actually shooting like a 32-inch axle to axle bow in terms of where the string angle's at. So they can get away with a shorter axle to axle bow with a huge cam, which because 28's real short. But because of that, short. Yeah, right. But because of that bigger cam, it feels a little bit longer. Same thing true with a 31.5. It really is closer to like a 33 and change with string angle. So that's cool. I mean, that's there's a lot of different ways to get around it, but I like that you understand that string angle really helps.
Well, yeah, I'm learning it. And it's funny that you bring up the cam size, because when I was at the pro shop yesterday, I literally mean this, guys. I was at the pro shop yesterday picking my bow up, and I was asking these kind of questions, and this is when I figured out the string angle. And it's funny you bring up the cam size, because they're primarily, well, I won't say primarily, but they sell a lot of PSE. So they're a PSE dealer. They're also, I think Bowtech, maybe, I can't remember, but they have a lot of PSE on the wall right now. And that's what he's saying. He's like, he's pointing out this bow is a 33-inch axle to axle. He's like, but it's got Mondo cams on it. So he's like, it still gives you that much wider string angle. So even though it's not really that longer axle, but because of these bigger cams, he's like, you're almost getting a 34 and a half inch. I'm like, okay. He's like, so you can still kind of, it's like a, air quote, hybrid, if you want to say, as far as, squeezing those inches out there to get, still that shorter axle, but that wider string angle, so you can have a little bit of best of both worlds, I think. And I can't recall what model PSE it was, because there's so many options out there that after a while they all meld together for me.
I know. Try working in a shop when you got to figure out how to work on all of them.
I can't even imagine.
It's brutal.
Talk to somebody on the phone, like, hey, I got this, and this, and this. You're like, yeah. I know what that one looks like. Yeah, I can figure that out.
Well, it's funny because there are some people like such as myself who like you say, oh, you know, I got a Hoyt from I think like 2015, and I'll be like, oh, is that the Nitrum or the Factor? And they'll be like, oh, it's the Nitrum. How'd you know? And I'm like, well, you know, I spent a lot of time working on bows and memorizing a lot of different stuff. But anyhow, let's go on to this release thing because this is an interesting thing that I find, in particular for you as a new shooter. You've already gone to a thumb button, right? So for the folks at home who might be new or don't understand, right? So the index style release is one you set up with your index finger, right? It has a wrist strap, and you draw the bow basically by using that wrist strap and holding on to the release. And then you have the thumb button, which is a handheld only. Sometimes they'll have a wrist lanyard just so you don't drop it out of the tree, but you do draw it with your hand, and then you activate the trigger with your thumb. And then you have hinges, which are we're not even going to go there right now, but that's a big target archery thing, and that is all handheld, and there is no button. You actually rotate or hinge your hand to sear it over and to get the reeds to fire. So it's very, very common for not even just first-time people, but for veterans, myself included, to hunt exclusively with a index style release because it's always on your wrist. The trigger feels like a gun trigger in the sense that you're working your index finger. It's very repeatable. You can kind of even anchor in different spots with it and in the heat of the moment and still see through your peep. But you've already gone to a thumb button. So I have to ask, did you start with an index style release? And if you did, and now you've gone to a thumb button, what was the deciding factor there?
Yeah, so I made this. Well, I've made this the switch to the thumb button just this last couple of weeks. I started out with a index style release because when I bought my bow, it came with all the accessories, the quiver and the sights and all that, and it came with a trophy ridge index style release, adjustable, and I use it. And for me, just coming into the sport, an index style release to me was, I thought, like one of the only options. Like that was the iconic piece of equipment that I'd always see or think about when I thought of compound archery. So I used it, and I shot pretty well with it. But I noticed after about a dozen arrows, my groups would start to get a little more open, and I'd start flinching a little more, and I was anticipating the pull of the trigger, and my target panic really started to come out, and it would get worse and worse because I would get more frustrated with myself, and it was bad. So I started doing a lot of research, watching YouTube channels and getting people's opinion on and that's when I really started opening my eyes to the fact that there's thumb buttons, there's hinges, there's back tension releases, there's it's not just an index style. And that's also to say that there's different levels of index style releases, so but everything that I saw was looking like, well over 80% of the industry was going to, or was using, a thumb button, a back tension, or a hinge, but a handheld release of some kind. And everybody's recommendation was, if you have target panic, which I do in a very bad way, that the going to like a back tension or a thumb button release would help with that dramatically. And in just the few arrows that I've shot changing over, I have already noticed a difference. Now, granted, I got it as a Spot Hog thumb release that was graciously donated to me. Actually, I will plug this real quick. It was graciously donated to me by Lancaster Archery. I reached out to them and told them what was going on. They said, yeah, we have one in the shop. We'll send you. So thank you to them. Huge thank you to them. But just in the few arrows I've shot with it, because I can adjust the trigger sensitivity and the pressure, it's eliminated the ability to have target panic. Now, and so I continued doing research, and maybe if I'd have spent some money on an index style release that had a double sear or a roller sear mechanism in it, and I could adjust it, then maybe I could eliminate some of my target panic. But I think that I tend to get in my head pretty deep when I'm start struggling with something. So I'm wondering if I remove that typical release position of my hand, as far as the index finger over a trigger, like shooting a rifle, and I eliminate that whole muscle memory aspect of it and force myself to kind of learn a new position, it won't give my brain the opportunity to panic for it. And so far, like I said, in the few arrows I've shot with the thumb release, that has been the case. I've felt very confident with it. It does take a few minutes to get past the fear of punching yourself in the face with pulling back on the thumb release and keeping your thumb out of the way of the trigger and everything. But yeah, that was the big thing. The biggest thing for me was my target panic was a killer for me, and the frustration it was giving me. So it would, I would shoot really good for a dozen arrows, and then after that, my group started going wider and wider, and it was more frustrating, and it kind of took the fun out of the archery for a second. So I had to stop. So I was only getting in, 20, 30 minutes of practice time before I got to take a break before I, lose it. And so far, like I said, in the short time I've switched over, I've noticed a difference. I can say that much for sure.
Right.
I do have a little bit of fear of the dropping it.
Yeah. Does that spot hog have the ability for you to attach like like a little rope lanyard or something?
It does not.
Okay.
And I mean, there's a possibility, like it's a 4-finger, so it's a little bit big. I'm not sure I'm a fan of the 4-finger aspect of it. I tend to draw my pinky behind the release.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one. I'm not even decided if I'm going to modify it, like cut that last little piece off and round it or not. Or, I've thought about putting a hole in the back of it to put a lanyard on. I don't know what I'm going to do with that just yet. But it does not have a factory position for a lanyard. So it's really a true handheld only release.
Okay.
But
yeah, I'm glad that you have brought up, this journey that you've been going through here, starting with an index style, realizing that's the first step, and that sounds cheesy, right? The first step is understanding you have a problem. And this idea that people are like, I'll just power through it. Right. But powering through it just makes it get worse. It's like powering through a knee injury. You're not going to jog it off. Right. You gotta think of something else to do. And so I find for me, my target panic now is not, I've been shooting for this will be my 17th year shooting. My target panic is different than what your type of first time target panic. You're experiencing groups that are enormous. You're experiencing like literal panic, right? Like, oh my gosh, this arrow needs to fire now or I'm going to die. That's the type of target panic. My target panic is it will have to do with like pin float, right? My pin float will change, and that causes me to do my shot a little bit faster or to draw a little bit erratically. That's my sort, but it's still it causes me problems in accuracy at a smaller scale. But I know then when I start changing releases, it's like, so I drive a manual, right? A vehicle. I drive a stick shift car. It's the exact same as an automatic car, right? It goes forward. It's still got a brake. It still has a gas pedal. But driving a manual car, I hearken to switching to a thumb button or switching to a hinge style release. You're still shooting a bow. You're still driving a car. But there's so many more little intricacies. I got to push into clutch. I got to move the gear shift myself. I have to release the clutch and push into gas at the same time. I got to push the clutch in before I start braking or the car is going to stall out. It's the exact same thing as driving an automatic. You just have to think a little bit more. And you're seeing a very positive result from this, which I think a lot of people see, and particularly in that first year, in that first couple of years of battling that target panic, changing up that release. Now, I will say, as a word of warning, eventually you'll get comfortable with that thumb button and you'll start to think about having target panic in other ways. And so this is why I personally, as a I don't want to call it a pro tip, but just as a tip, is do flip flop, do go back and forth. For me in particular, I know that I'm going to be shooting a hinge for 3D and I'm going to be shooting a hinge during indoor. So that means during the hunting seasons, I can shoot my index style release. Now, I own multiple bows. I have a hunting bow and I have a target bow. So it's, that I'm cheating a little bit in that way. But my brain knows, okay, it's late July, it's early August. I need to start shooting an index style release for that preparation in the fall when I'm shooting that index style release in the tree stand. Then I know like around November when the archery season starts to wind down, I can start shooting a hinge style release because that index style release is still very fresh in my mind. But I know in my preparation for the indoor, we have some indoor 3D as well as indoor spots. I need to start shooting a hinge. I don't do thumb buttons. It's not my thing. But if that was, your thing at home or you there in Washington, that's what you'd start that transition. And then if I still have tags left, here in PA in middle of January, early January, we have the second late archery season. So I can kind of go back to shooting an index. So I get, like 3 or 4 flip-flops, if you will, throughout the year, and it keeps me honest. It helps with my it helps me with my back tension. I'm not saying with the back tension release. I'm saying actually keeping my pressure into the back wall. I don't get lazy. I end up then shooting them all the same in terms of the pressure. I shoot them all in terms of the timing of my release. That's another big thing too, that I'll just mention briefly. Everybody kind of has their own shot clock, whether they think about it or not. If you watch, particularly, it's fun to watch the 3D guys that are really like Levi Morgan. Danny McCarthy's probably the best one. Chance Bobeff, um, Chance Bobeff, and Danny McCarthy. They hold for, I think, somewhere like around 15, 20 seconds. It seems like they come to full draw, they anchor, and then even on their indoor game, it is a very long hold. And there are certain people that they come to draw, they anchor, and then it's like 5 to 7 seconds. I'm in that 5 to 7 second category. After I come to full draw and I anchor, when I use my hinge in particular and it clicks over when I come to anchor and I acquire my target, I have about 5 to 7 seconds of hold before the bow is released. That is something that I know for my target panic, I must keep in my head. I must keep that basketball shot clock running, because I know if I start going faster or if I start holding it on to later, it's going to cause me to, oh my gosh, I need to fire it now. Or if it's on the later side, it'll be, oh my gosh, I've held this so long, I need to send it now. And if I don't send it in that shot clock window, I get out of rhythm, and that's when I start screwing around, and that's when I start getting that target panic. So that's another thing to keep in mind too. I'll even film myself, like if I'm prepping for a big indoor shoot or big 3D shoot, I'll film myself shooting and I'll go back and watch the film, and I won't even worry about like my form or where the arrows hit. I'm watching how long it takes me once I come to full draw, my release clicks over, and how long it takes to fire. Am I being consistent? And if I see them being inconsistent, I know I need to continue being consistent, because that will help me in the heat of the moment, in the woods, on the 3D course, final arrow of a Vegas type shoot. That consistency, that autonomous muscle memory will take over, and I'll be able to get better scores, better results from it.
And I think some of my target panic is that combination of, feeling that, like, put my finger on the trigger and then, okay, I can feel it touching. I'm feeling pressure. Is it going to go? Is it going to go? Oh, it's going to go. And then it goes. And I think that's the most of it. But I also suffer from the pin float aspect of it. Is I want so badly to hit the center of the target, what I'm aiming for. Like, like not necessarily the center of the target, right? Not just the 10 ring, but I mean, if I'm aiming, I want the right upper corner. That's where I want to hit. And I put my pin there. I want so badly to hit that target. Like I expect, like maybe my expectations for my ability is more than my ability can achieve, but I want that. So then my target, like then my pin's kind of floating, and maybe it has a lot to do with, just not strong enough in the shoulder to hold the bow, or, maybe I need a little bit less or a little bit more stabilizer weight or whatever. But I get that pin float and it's like, okay, shoot now. No, shoot now. No, wait. Oh, and then I just punch it, and it's like, oh man. So, and like I said, it's like there's so many things encompassing that problem. It's not, target panic is a very large issue if you start breaking it down. I mean, you have to, like I said, I'm only doing this for a year, and it's not like I've been doing it every day for a year. So the strength in my bow shoulder isn't wonderful enough or strong enough to really hold that bow. It's not a whole lot of weight, but you stick that out, 2.5 feet out there, it weighs up real quick. And then you got to try, and you're holding it there, and then you're panicking about the pin floating in, and it's not trying to hold it steady, but trying to hold it pretty steady, and then not punching the trigger and follow through, and all these things are going through your head. And especially as a first time bow hunter, I want so badly to start down the path of proper form and not give myself bad habits that I have to break later on. So I'm over analyzing and overthinking, and I honestly am probably somewhere in that 15 to 20 second hold when I get to my draw. And that's a lot of the problem is I need to drastically cut that down and get rid of the time to think about it, and just kind of go into not a rapid fire, but a much shorter shot cycle that I'm currently doing. Like I think I'm just overdoing it, and then I'm fatiguing my arm because I'm not, properly strength trained for that. But yeah, like I said, so far I've had a very positive experience with the thumb button release. And because I can adjust that sensitivity, I can make it so I can barely, like my thumb barely even touches. I couldn't even tell you if it was knurled on the thumb wheel or not, because it's so light, which I might change here in a little bit, might just stiffen up a hair. But yeah, it goes so quickly that so far I'm liking that aspect over my index. And that might have something to do also with the index style that I have. If I went with a little bit more, um, a better quality, so to say, or just a little more expensive, or so instead of having it's just a standard trophy ridge, and it's something you can't adjust anything. So it's not a sear trigger, it's not a double sear, it's not a roller sear. And if you went with one of those, then where you could adjust out all of the finger travel and just have pressure, that might be a good way of eliminating that trigger panic, target panic aspect of it. But again, the other problem, like we were talking about, and I know maybe we can transition to that, is how do you know the right release to pick? How do you do that? I mean, these releases are like anywhere from $39.99 up to $300 for a release. Who's spending $300 per release just to try and see if it works for them? I can't get on that bandwagon. I can't get, like, I have the release I got when I got the bow. Okay, well, people say, like my archery shop, he hunts with a index style release, and he loves it, right? His is, I think, a roller sear. Well, I don't know. I haven't asked him, so that could be a fault on me. But how do I get a hold of a release to try it to see if it's something I want to go with? Do I have to spend $150, $200 on a release, try it, realize it doesn't work for me, and then I'm stuck with selling it and losing some money? How do I know if I'm going to like a button, or do I go back tension, or do I? I'm not even going to go into the hinge release because that's way outside my ability. But like, how do you decide on those things without spending the big money? I don't know. And maybe it is just as simple as talking to, your local archery shop and asking them, hey, can I try this release? It very well could be that simple. I just haven't taken that route yet. Like I said, with everything going on in the world right now, you just popping into a place to do things like that has become extremely difficult. So you have to rely on, word of mouth from your friends and what they're doing, and going to, watch reviews on YouTube or channels like yours or other people, and then have to take into their account of what they're talking about, because it's what they've used or what they like, they style, and they recommend. So you're like, okay, well, he's shooting quite well with it. He's been using it for a couple of years and he really likes it. But I don't know if that's a determining factor for what I'm going to like, and how do I justify picking the right release? That's what I've struggled with. So I ended up at the thumb release just because it was like, for me, it was like that middle ground between, as far as, index style release was still having a trigger to actually pull, and a back tension release where you don't, like, it's just pulling through it. This was like a combination. I can still pull through the shot, but I'm also still in control of it a little bit as far as the actual thumb button. So in my mind, and the way I'm looking at it and the way I'm treating it, is it's like that quote unquote, like, kind of hybrid in between the transition points for me. And that's the way I'm looking at it. And that's the way I'm attacking it when I'm shooting the bow. So it's working for me. I'm still pulling through the shot like you're supposed to. Like, I come in my anchor point, I hold it, and then I don't just hit the button. It's, the whole hand and everything, the shoulder, you pull through back tension, you pull it, but it also, the thumb kind of squeezes at the same time. So it's one fluid motion, and it's working so far. But like you said, I'm going to do it for long enough, and I'm probably going to get comfortable with it, and I will get some target panic, or other aspects of the target panic are going to start to rear their head, and I'll have to deal with those as well. So I just don't know what to do about picking the right equipment. That's what it boils down to, I think. How do you pick the right equipment?
Yeah, and it's tough. It really is tough. So it's funny because I worked in the shop yesterday, and I had a guy come in, and he wanted to try out a thumb button release. And he's like, can I just open this up and try it? And it was a package from a manufacturer that was sealed. It wasn't just kind of like stapled. It was sealed on all the sides. And you just can't cut that open, have him go downstairs and shoot a dozen arrows, bring it up, and then seal that package right back up. And as an archery shop, you can't, because now you have this like open box, right? And as I've said, for those who didn't listen to the first episode of the AJ podcast, in that first episode, there's money that's already sitting on the wall that's kind of dead money in a bow shop. People don't understand that. There are lots of releases that we have on our wall at our store that are target specific releases that we have to buy from our manufacturers that we represent. And in our area here in rural PA, we don't have the target archers, but we have target archery releases. And nobody's buying hinges. No one's coming in to buy a $200 hinge in our market. So we have them sitting on the wall, and they're going to sit there for who knows how long. And it's really a shame. And it brings up another point that I made in that podcast that you've alluded to already, is that do you just buy a release and just deal with it? And then, in a couple of years, when you feel like you've kind of, quote, offset the cost by using it for a couple of years, you go back and buy another one and hope that one's the one. Because that's what we see in the shop. A guy will come in and buy his accessories, and if he only does his bow hunt a couple times a year and the release is okay, but it's not amazing, he doesn't really care because it's not that much. He's not like he's taking it to competitions and stuff. He's just trying to shoot a whitetail with it, and so he doesn't care if it's not the perfect fit. And he might not buy another release for a decade. And, so we sold him one release. He was okay with it, but he was okay with it because he didn't need it that much. And now he doesn't buy another release. And it's only the guys such as you or myself or other people that are like, I'm not happy with what I'm doing. I need to change something up. And then you go and look at it and go, for me to change something up is like $150, $100, not even, 75 to 90. You're like, good grief, that's all. I could buy a dozen Victory arrow shafts that I shoot for hunting for $90.
Yeah.
And a dozen arrows to me is a little bit more useful because I break them on deer and I shoot them at tournaments and stuff. And can I live with just a release that's a little less desirable and be able to afford more arrows or what have you? So this is great in terms of talking the accessories. Yeah, it's there. I know of some shops here locally that will let you try a release. Like they've just bitten the bullet and opened up packages and they just have them sitting behind the counter, and they've just eaten those dollars and they're just going to live with it because they're used to eating it because there's a lot of money that they're eating on the wall already. But yeah, right. But most shops don't do that. It's just part of the business model. And so you kind of are going blind, as you said, YouTube reviews, maybe a Amazon type review, archery forums like Archery Talk, that sort of stuff. But basically it's kind of, you hope that it works when you try it. So I will say, let's start answering these questions of, how do we know to pick one accessory over the other? In terms of when it comes to spending money, my opinion, as someone who has gone and shot really cheap equipment, has shot really expensive equipment, and we talked even a little bit before we started recording the podcast, is that anything that for me that comes in contact with the arrow, because that is the most important part of the archery thing. You could dry fire a bow all day long. You're not going to get any points for it. Without shooting the arrow into the target, you don't have archery. And so anything that comes in contact with the arrow's flight is worth spending the money on, in my opinion. So that's your release, and that's your rest, and that is also to an extent the arrow itself. Those are kind of the three biggest things that are worth spending the money on. You're shooting a Bear Cruiser, not a very expensive bow, but gosh, it flings arrows.
Yeah, exactly.
It flings arrows. Exactly. You're accurate with it. You're having fun with it. And if the draw length wasn't, went out to your draw length, you'd probably be 100% instead of just kind of like, yeah, it's going to work for now. You'd be like, yeah, this is perfect. I don't need anything else. And that's the way I've always been with bows, because up until recently, I had always bought used equipment. And so I had to play with the hand that was dealt to me. And so, but when it comes to the release itself and the adjustments you can make, the rest itself and the quality there, there's nothing wrong with the Whisker Biscuit, but gosh, in 2020, drop-aways are just better. It just is. And there's a lot of companies making some really high quality ones out there. And I shoot them for target. I shoot them for 3D. I shoot them for hunting. And then the arrow tube itself. Those are the three things that I think are worth spending a little bit more money on to get more adjustability, to get more modularity. They make handheld releases where you can, like you're saying, how yours is a 4-finger, but you wish it was a 3. Well, you know, they make releases for thumb buttons that are, they have interchangeable fingers. You could put a 3-finger in, or you could put a 4-finger, or you could even shoot it as a 2-finger, as wild as that sounds. And the same thing is true with index style releases. They make some where the arm is very adjustable. They make some where you can adjust the time of travel, how hot, if you will. As you said, roller sear, double sear. I shoot a Scott Ghost, which is a magnetic sear. So there's just a lot of really good ways that you can upgrade, if you will, on those pieces of equipment that make contact with the arrow. And I think those are the ones worth doing that on and worth kind of risking biting the bullet on. Now, when it comes to the other ones, like your quiver and your stabilizer, you know, the type of peep that you shoot, even your sight to an extent, I personally couldn't care less. You know, when it comes to, I'll start with the stabilizer, because stabilizers are unfortunately one of those things I think that are grossly overhyped and overmarketed. Now, I will say the point of a stabilizer is to stabilize the bow, right? That is the whole point. And so if you're buying a 4-inch stabilizer, you're not doing yourself any good, right? Because that's not going to stabilize anything. With the type of sights and rests that I shoot, particularly my hunting bow, I need a sidebar to balance out the weight, but not everybody does. You don't have to buy a sidebar unless you actually are experiencing a lot of lean to the, if you're a right-handed archer, your bow will lean to the right because the sight's on the right-hand side of the bow and the rest is on the right-hand side of the bow. And it'll, and the quiver, if you shoot with the quiver on, and it'll lean to that side. And so I have a pretty heavy rest and a pretty heavy sight. And so it leans to the right pretty hard. And so I'll put a stabilizer bar on the left side to counterbalance that. But all a stabilizer is just a tube with some weight on the end. Right? You don't need to go out and buy a $90 to $140 single stabilizer. Now, if you want to buy a pair of stabilizers for like $100, $150, yeah, that's, and it comes with a knuckle, you know, to adjust the back bar setting. Yeah, couldn't agree more. That's fine. But you don't need to go shooting a 15-inch bar for hunting, you know, that sort of stuff. That I never see.
Yeah, I'm shooting I think it's a 10, maybe 12-inch little bee stinger that I got. Actually, truth be told, I stole it off my daughter's bow. I bought her a bow and it came with it, and I said, yeah, you don't need this. You can't even hold the bow up. So I took that from her. But I'm looking, because like you brought up, when you are a right-handed shooter or left-handed, depending on what you got, your sight, your rest, your quiver, all of that's on the right-hand side of the bow. So you get that right-hand lean. And I'm a right-hand shooter. So I was considering getting that the CBE stabilizer hunter kit which is like a
the Torx kit.
Yeah, exactly. With the front bar, which is I think 12-inch, 14-inch, and then the back
it's an 11 and the back's a 7.
So that's what I was looking at, because I'm trying to get that balance out, and I was also hoping that it might kind of help stabilize, like, because of the way that you hold the bow and the riser position and everything. The bow naturally wants to roll either away from you or towards you, depending upon just like you just holding it there, I've noticed. And so I'm thinking that not only will that stabilizer system help balance it left to right, but also kind of maybe help neutralize it in my hand a little bit when I play with the weights and the ounces, and to really dial in that stabilization of, you know, when I'm at full draw, I'm not, the pressure I'm pulling into the draw isn't wanting to pull the bow, you know, in a backwards rotation versus letting it fall away from me, kind of trying to neutralize that as much as I can. That's my hope. So that is, I think, that's probably gonna be one of my next purchases next year, maybe. But then again, if, like you said, and I agreed with, this bow is not 100% perfect for me. It is good. I enjoy it. It's going to work for me. I'm going to hopefully take an animal with it, and that's exciting. And I'm going to do some tournaments or some 3D shoots with it. It's going to be good. But, you know, in a year, maybe 2 years, I'm going to be changing my whole bow again. So then the next one I buy, it may not have the same kind of issues, and I may not need that much stabilizing. Then again, I'm stuck with another piece of equipment, which that is okay. Like, that transition I'm okay with, and I'm excited for that. But yeah, the stabilizer, I'm thinking is like you said, is there's money to be spent in the right places at the right time. And so far, I think I'm doing that as far as I spent some money on some arrows. I bought some nice arrows, the Bloodline arrows. I think they're really nice. They're a 3000s tolerance for straightness, which for a guy who's just beginning, I'm not going to know. Truth be told, I wouldn't notice the difference between a 6000th and a 1000th arrow. Like, my grouping isn't that tight. I'm not going to notice it. It's fine. So I said, I'll go with the 3000s. But I spent the money on the quality arrow, and I bought some nice broadheads so that I could take a good clean shot at an animal. And I bought, a nice quality rest, and I've got a decent release. So I'm doing the right stuff at the right time in with my budget. And you have to be realistic about your budget. I mean, and decide, like I said, I ended up buying my bow system twice over now. I've spent the same amount of money to buy the whole thing and just to rebuild it again from the ground up. So word of advice to everybody is, if you're looking to get into, getting a compound bow, don't forget that if you buy a used bow with all the accessories on it, there's a good chance you're going to have to change some of that. That's per your aesthetics, per your taste, per your skill set, or what you're doing with it. Like we're talking about 3D or indoor or hunting. So it may not be most beneficial to buy a complete, used bow package, if you will, as opposed to just a stripped bow. You go to the archery shop, my archery shop owner, he's got his old bow back on the shelf, hanging on the wall. He put new strings on it, no accessories or anything. And, it may be, a couple $100 outside of my initial budget, but I'm only going to have to buy the accessories or transfer the accessories over. So it could save you some money to do it that way. And then you can get the accessories that you actually want and don't just end up with them. That's just what I'm learning the hard way.
Yeah. And you could play, you could play it either way. You could play as, even if you buy a brand new ready to hunt package. I know a lot of folks that come into the shop want to do that. I have a lot of my good buddies that have gone and purchased ready to hunt packages. And Bear in particular, the brand of bow that you're shooting, is really famous for making these ready to hunt packages.
It was a ready to hunt, and it works.
And it works. Right. The sight is fine. Bear and Trophy Ridge are in cahoots together. The sight's fine. The stabilizers are okay. It's going to harvest a North American blacktail in your case, or whitetail in my case, or whatever. It's going to work just fine. But would it be better to, instead of just dealing with just fine, buy it bare bow, no accessories? Say, I don't know what the cost off would approximately be. And then maybe you buy that better stabilizer system, which I think, by the way, that CBE torque set is by far the best hunter front bar, back bar system I've ever used.
And that's what
oh my gosh, it's fantastic.
Going with reviews and YouTube channels, I'm in agreement. That's what I found is it gets the most positive feedback. And I think it's going to work well in across the board. Because like I said, I want to do some 3D hunts, and I want to do some target archery, maybe indoors. And I think it'll help. It'll still help me. I don't think it's going to hinder me in those aspects. So I think it's a well-rounded multi-tool, if you will, as far as stabilizers go. So I'm excited for that at some point in the budget.
Well, let's dive into that too. Let's start talking about that, the kind of the routines and the differences for the hunting, the 3D and the indoor. Let's kind of unpack this a little bit, because obviously I have my perspective where I've been doing the target side for a decade now, seriously. And, you're kind of in your first year with it. So I'll talk about it quickly. Now, we'll just, for the sake of sanity, we'll just pretend that we're back to like 2015. And I'm shooting one bow for everything. Now, now I have backup bows for backup bows type thing. But we'll just pretend I'm back to, so I have my one bow. I shoot bow hunter class. So that's where we're both being. We have to shoot one pin or fixed pins. We can't touch our sight. Once the sight is set, you can't touch it once you enter the course, either for 3D or for indoor. And so I like that because it's a lot just like hunting, right? I'm looking at my 20-yard pin either in the backyard for practice for hunting, or I have to judge the distance in a 3D situation. Same thing if I do on my rangefinder in the whitetail woods. I have to judge that distance, and I have to gap shoot with my pins if I don't think it's at, whatever I set my pins to, 20, 30, 40. So in terms, I will say with my practice for the hunting, for me, it's just shooting at things in the backyard. And then also the closer I get, shooting things out of tree stands, which is not something you would be experiencing there in Washington. You're doing much more spot and stock. But shooting things out of the saddle, but then also just taking my neighbor. I don't have any woods in my backyard, but my neighbor does. And so he's very gracious and lets me drag my morel targets over there and roll them out through the woods. And I'll just kind of walk around in a circle and shoot at the particularly the big high roller, because they're dice, I can shoot them at any side. And I will try to judge that distance just like I would at the 3D course, with the light and the shadows, and try to make it so I have to shoot just like 2 or 3 inches past a tree like I would in a real whitetail situation. But in those cases, I'm keeping my shots between 15 and 30 yards. So judging in the hunting situation for me is not that big of a deal, because you have about a 3-inch to 4-inch vital zone, if you will, with a whitetail, and you're trying to get a killing shot. So for me, it's like 15 to 30 yards, knowing where my pins are. And I just have fun. Oh, I kind of blew that shot, misjudged it. I'll take the rangefinder out. I don't care. And then for the 3D, though, in the summer, it's a lot of the same. But in my class in 3D, we shoot, depending on the shoot, it's either a 40 or a 45 max yard distance. And so that is not the hunting for me. Really, my max for hunting is 35 yards. And quite frankly, it's only 30. Really, to make a clean, ethical shot for me, that's where I'm very comfortable. But when your max distance I shoot an IBO here in the Northeast, that's our classification of 3D. And in the Southeast, they kind of ASA. In the Northeast here, 40 to 45 yards, which means that the vast majority of our targets are between 30 and 47 yards. That's like the vast majority of our targets. And you have time, because you got to step up to the stake. You have to range these targets. And then you have to make a shot at an 11 ring, which is about 2 inches in diameter. So you're looking through binoculars, you're taking your time. Other people are shooting in your group. And so that's what I do for practice. I will set up targets between 30 and 47 yards, because they give you like a 2-yard over the max distance of 47. And I will try to judge it. I will step up to a stake, that I'll put in my yard or in my neighbor's woods. And I'll look at a target and I think that's 37 yards. And then I'll glass it. Then I'll take a look at it with my naked eye again. Then I'll glass it again, see how big it looks in my binoculars. And it's trying to guesstimate the size and how far it is away. It's a very long process. And then I'll knock the arrow and take the shot. And if it works, I either judged it right or I didn't judge it right. And it's a lot like golf. I hearken 3D archery, the practice, to be a lot like golf. It's a very slow moving game. And one shot could mean the difference between being on the podium and not being on the podium. But then the indoor game is wildly different, because in a weekend, you could be shooting 120 arrows. At a 3D course, at most, you're shooting 60 in a weekend. For an indoor, it's 120 usually. And if you're shooting in like a Vegas style where it's 30, 30, 30, you got 90 plus whatever shoot off you have. So you could be shooting up to 150 arrows. And you have to be doing 150 arrows, and you're shooting at something the size of an American penny. And so that is all about repetition and getting arrows off. You have 2 minutes to get 3 arrows off. And so that's where that shot rhythm comes down to really be in play. 3D, it's important, sure. Hunting, it's important. But that shot rhythm for indoor, you have to become a robot. And you have to have that clock going on in your head be the same. If you watch any of the professionals shoot at Vegas or the Lancaster shoot, you watch them, all of their shots look identical. They always finish at the exact, within like a 10-second window on the shooter clock. Guys like Danny McCarthy take almost 2 minutes. Guys like Nathan Brooks take like 1:15. But that is 100% every single time the amount of time that they take. And that's the key thing for me with indoor, is staying in that rhythm. Because as soon as you bump out of that rhythm, it throws everything else off. And then who knows how many ins or how many rounds of 3 arrows it'll take for you to get back on track. So that's my, in a nutshell, my 3 ways of practicing for those. And that's how I recommend it to anybody first starting out in archery, because they're all so different. You think, oh, you're just shooting an arrow at a foam animal, or you're shooting an arrow at a yellow piece of paper. But then you get into the situation, the lighting's different, in an indoor situation, you're right next to somebody else. They give you, well, not COVID anymore, but you had like a 2-foot little rectangle all to yourself. And that sounds like a lot of space until you realize that you have one person behind you, one person in front of you, the guy behind you shooting a trad bow, the guy in front of you shoot 30-inch stabilizer. You don't have a whole lot of room. And so, yeah, it gets very interesting very quickly. And so those are the kind of recommendations I have for people starting out in those things.
Yeah. So we have a good size, acreage we're on. We got a bag target hanging in some trees. And so I've marked out, 20 yards, 30 yards, 40 and 50 just for giggles. But I started and pretty much sit right there at 20 yards, just drill in the center of the bag and just getting comfortable with my draw cycle, my anchor point, the feel of it, my stance, and just focusing on all that stuff. And then, and as I get more arrows going in, and this is the process I'm going to take in preparation for hunting, because like I said, I'm not sitting out of a saddle or a tree standing, so I'm going to be walking around. So I'm going to come up on an animal, hopefully, and it could be, 15, 20 yards away, but at a 45-degree uphill angle or 45-degree downhill angle. So I am doing kind of what you were saying. The target is because it's just hanging in the trees, is still in the same spot, but I'm going to walk around. So I'm at different angles of it, different heights of it. I'm shooting uphill, I'm shooting downhill. I've gone out previously, and it was pouring rain one day, and I went out and shot in the rain for 5-10 minutes because I watched a Daniel McDonald video, and he was talking about, he's like, hunting's not a fair weather sport. You're going to be out there in the rain, and what kind of effect does it have on your arrows? That's another thing that we don't think about. But yeah, I went out there. It dropped my arrows 2 inches in my grouping in the rain. So, even in shooting just that one, I was just shooting straight into it. So moving around different angles, different positions, different distances, it lets you see how, if you're shooting up to down, how that affects your arrow flight and your pattern and your grouping on target. And then same thing if you're shooting uphill, how's it going to affect all that stuff? And then not to mention it changes your distance, line of sight versus angle, all that stuff. And if you have a rangefinder that can figure that out for you, but if you're out at a 3D shoot, you don't get to have that piece of technology to work for you. So that's, like I said, my goal is I want to participate in and find some local, little indoor tournaments that's going on and pop in there for a weekend and try it. Or I have another archery club that I joined that's near the house, and I have a walk through like 14 target course you can walk through, and they put up 3D targets from time to time, and they'll do a 3D hunt. So I'm going to go participate in those. And that place is really more about the community of archery versus the competition part of archery. They're very exciting about, just getting out and enjoying the hunting thing. So that's a place where I can really stick my toe in the water and get a feel for the 3D world and how I do it. So I'm gonna use that as a transition and a way to practice that competition mindset, like that whole draw cycle and shot cycle, excuse me, because it's not as strenuous there, I think, or in my mind, it's not going to be as strenuous there as it will be in the actual, like an indoor tournament, when you have all those people crammed around you and all the extra noises and all that kind of aspect. I think I believe there's going to be a different feel about it and a different vibe. But as far as hunting, I'm just shooting as many arrows as I can just to get the strength built up, the form dialed in, used to my equipment, how they're flying, how the arrows, figure, because I got a dozen arrows. Well, that's 11 now. I lost one, but I got 11 arrows. So, and figure out, because I've also been told that, some hit differently, some hit harder, some stay straighter, some do this better, whatever. So figuring out of those 11 remaining arrows, which 5 do I want to take in my quiver to go hunting? Which ones are like the creme de la creme of my choices? And to figure that out, you're going to have to, shoot a lot of arrows, shoot them a lot, keep notes of them. So I think the best thing is just to repetitively shoot, shoot 20 or 30 yards, bounce back and forth. But focusing, for me, I really want to focus on my form, my shot execution, a little bit more importantly than necessarily the group size. Like I still want to be able to make clean kill shots and effective kill shots on an animal, so it's ethical and it does what it needs to do. But if my grouping is 4 to 5 inches right now, but my form is spot on, it feels more comfortable, I'll be more happy with that, and then I can really start to dial in and shrink that group in with just the more arrows and repetition. So that's how I'm going to go after it, at least until I start doing the 3D shoots, assuming they're open up soon with the whole COVID thing. That's making it tough.
I know we just started opening up again. We have a shoot actually coming up next Sunday, just to y'all come and shoot. Nothing major, but that'll be the first 3D I'll have gone to all year. So hopefully it's enjoyable and I'm finally able to get out because it's been a while since I stuck foam. But I real quick do want to say it's good that you understand, if anybody who's new listening at home, that the repetition of archery is how you get better. You can lift all the weights in the world, you really can, but it's shooting the bow. It really is, and that's the number one thing. And then of course, when you're talking about finding of the 11 arrows that are left, which one hit the best and which one hits the hardest, which one fly the best. Yeah, it's a lot of tuning, and that's a whole freaking podcast series in of itself. I mean, you want to talk about going down the rabbit hole? Woo!
Yeah, I know.
It's deep.
I started watching your
deep
clocking
one.
videos and your fletching videos, and I'm like, man, I didn't know diddly. Like I knew I didn't know a lot.
Yeah.
But I thought I didn't realize there was so much intricacies. There we go. I got it. Into the arrow itself. I really didn't know it was like there's so many, like it's outrageous. I mean, it blows my mind because I even thought that once you got your arrow and you put a field tip in it, if you change your field tip to a broadhead of the same weight, arrow should fly the same, should hit the same. No, they don't do that. You can't be practicing with your field tips all the time, and then the day before you go hunting, throw your broadheads on and be like, it's going to drill the same hole. No, it's not. You have to shoot broadheads into a target to know what they're going to do as well. And, repetition is key, 100%. You've got to shoot, a lot of arrows, but you have to shoot your hunting setup as well. Like you have to put your broadheads in. You have to know that you're going to destroy your foam target with your broadheads, but it has to be done because you need to know how, like, are your arrows dropping 2 inches impact zone, or is it 3 inches, or is it like way like what's happening? And then if you're shooting mechanical versus broadheads, or 3 fixed blade versus 4 fixed blade, like it's all going to travel different. So you have to take that into consideration when you're shooting. So, you figure out what arrows seem to fly the best, and then put your broadheads in it and shoot those a bazillion times too. So I went and bought a specific, broadhead rated foam target for $30 used or something that nobody ever used. It was used. They bought it. They didn't use it. Yeah, that made sense. For the sole purpose of drilling it with my broadheads. Once, like I said, I have a big bag target that I shoot, and the kids shoot, and everybody shoots, and I'll shoot that with my field points, and I might shoot the foam target with the field points too, just because I can toss it out in the yard like you did with your morels and get different ranges. But that foam target, its primary purpose in life is to be drilled with my broadheads, so I can really know what's changing. Because like I said, hunting is my primary goal with this. That's what I'm at. I want to be a bow hunter. So if my field tips are coming in perfect and my broadheads are coming in low, I'm going to adjust for the broadhead because I want the broadhead to hit exactly where I want the broadhead to hit. So if at the end of the day, when I'm shooting for fun and for target practice, that my grouping has to be 2 inches high with my field points to make sure that my broadheads are 2 inches, or excuse me, right on target, then that's what I'm going to do until I can hit the holy grail of the time frame where I get to have a hunting bow and a target bow. But for the moment right now, it's a hunting bow first and a target bow second. So my broadheads have to hit where they need to hit.
Well, thank you so much, Drew, and everybody for joining us today on the Average Jack Archery Podcast. It has been a blast. Again, folks, if you want to be a part of the Average Jack Archery Podcast, averagejackarchery@gmail.com. Find me at social media, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Drew, you would like to plug your local archery shop?
Yes, I would. I'd like to put out there Rock Creek Archery. They're located in Tukwila, Washington now. I can't say enough good things about them. So if you're in the area or near it. It's in Bellevue, Seattle, Kent, all those kind of areas, Renton in Washington. If you're in those areas and you're looking for a place to get stuff done, to get accessories, to get tuned up, or even when we open up and they can actually use the range, check out Rock Creek Archery. You can find them on Facebook. You can find them on Instagram. Great place, good people. I can't say enough good things. Check them out.
Well, that's fantastic. It's always good to hear positive experiences from the local guy, if you will, going to his shop. That's always fantastic to hear. So, folks, thanks once again for joining us. I hope you're able to get outside, enjoy the sport of archery hunting if you so choose. Definitely enjoy God's beautiful creation, and we'll get to see you next time.